Hello, everyone, and welcome. As you come into our webinar today, we are thrilled to have you here. We are going to let folks come on in, and we will get started in 2 minutes. Looks like we have a whole lot of folks coming in and filtering in now. We will be getting started in just 1 minute. Thank you all for joining us today. I think one of my favorite parts of every webinar is watching as everyone comes in and joins us for this great conversation today, and seeing just how many folks are on the line with us here. So we'll go ahead and kick it off. I know that we all have a busy day ahead of us. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Looking Ahead, a guide to building your strategic wealth map. I'm Holly Mazzocca, president of Bartlett Wealth Management, and it is my pleasure to present with you here today alongside my colleague and partner, Jason Katz, who leads our financial planning efforts here at Bartlett. And we are thrilled to be here with you today as we think about this strategic wealth map as really that first step in the process for our clients. And while this is the first step that we work through with our business owner clients, and Jason is going to touch on our solutions for business owners as we jump into this and look ahead to the wealth map. This exercise was built for all of our clients. And I keep my copy of the wealth map with me at my house, bring it to the office. It's an exercise that my own family worked through as we started to think about what are those values and how do we want to really connect them to our long-term goals. And that's what we're going to work through on the wealth map today. Our passion at Bartlett, our purpose is to provide financial peace of mind. Our goal is to simplify complexity for our clients. And this is a big part of what we do, is really connecting the purpose of your wealth to your ultimate financial plan, and then bringing that to life through our investment management. So it's a whole piece of the puzzle that we are bringing to you here today. Today, we're going to be working through that looking ahead document, which Maggie, our director of marketing, has shared in advance and has also shared down in the link in the chat box. So please join into the conversation today. Submit your comments into the chat. Submit your Q&A. Jason and I will have lots of time at the end to go over those. So we're looking forward to a really engaging conversation. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into today's conversation. Jason is going to walk us through the 5-step process that we have in place for our business owner clients, which starts with this strategic wealth map. Then we're going to walk through that strategic wealth map, walking through the exercises, giving you a sense of how they apply to our various client experiences and lives and our own situations. And then at the end, we have a lot of information that we're going to share with you around tips and tricks for financial planning and investments right now here as we hit the midway point of 2023. So with that, Jason, why don't you kick us off and share how we work with business owners on this strategy process and how this applies to all clients.
Great, thanks, Holly. Yeah, so what we're going to be doing today really fits nicely into what you see on your screen as that first step, which is really defining your purpose. So when we're thinking about our business owner clients, and as Holly suggested before, all of our clients, we would like to take a step back and say, why are we here? What are our values? What are we really trying to accomplish? And so you'll see that the exercise that we're going to go through today is really that first step. It's really starting to set those overall goals for, what are you trying to accomplish over your lifetime? The second step in the process for our business owners specifically is really looking at the business itself and the health of the business, and maybe, what is plan A with the business? Is that a family transition? Is it a potential sale to a third party down the road? That then works itself nicely into step 3, which is your personal financial plan. And how does this business fit in? We have buy-sell agreements. We have expenses that are paid by the business, expenses paid personally. How does that all fit together? Life insurance, all of those things, and really starting to model out, what a potential business sale or business transition would mean for you and your family long term. Step 4 really focuses on, the actual exiting of the business itself. So is that a transition over time to family members? Is it possibly something like an ESOP or a sale to a third party or a strategic buyer or even private equity? And that really focuses on building your team. And who are your team advisors that are going to help you transition that? And that's part of our process as well. And then finally, we get to step 5, which is really kind of ongoing for the rest of your life. It's really, how do we steward these resources for the long term? And are there any extra things that we can be doing service-wise that were done before within the business that you might need now? So we find that, this exercise really, and the looking ahead document specifically, is really beneficial for clients whose one spouse is in the business and one spouse is not in the business. It gives you kind of a language to start creating family goals together and, get clarity of the picture of what this looks like going forward.
That's great. Thanks, Jason, for walking through that process and to really ground us that we are starting at the very beginning. And whether you are a business owner, whether you're an executive, or whether you are just really thinking that now's the time to revisit that purpose of your wealth, to understand where maybe you need to re-engage, look at some ways to really enjoy it. I think that's the goal of our time here together today. So as I said, Maggie has shared out that looking ahead document. If anyone doesn't have access to it, we're going to re-pop it down into the chat again. Just look at that current chat, and we're going to use this as a guide here for our conversation. Now, I will say that Jason and I were laughing that if you're the type of person where you printed this off in advance and you like to have a hard copy, you might need some whiteout or a pencil and an eraser. This is not a one and done. Like all aspects of the financial planning process, this is an evolution. It's something that takes time. And it's really something that we find is most valuable when communicated with those in your life who need to know these things, where you can find accountability buddies, where you can work on these topics together. So jumping in, the first one that we are going to work on today is the 5 whys. And I'm going to turn it over to Jason to walk us through how does this exactly work in practice?
Yeah, so the 5 whys, and maybe some of you have gone through this before, but the concept is you keep asking yourself why. So the first question is, why do you work? Or maybe it's, why do I run this business? Or, what's the purpose of my wealth? And so as you're going through this, your first answer might look something like, well, why do I work? Well, it's answer, to earn a living. Okay, well, why do you earn a living? Well, maybe it's to provide for my family. And, frankly, most people stop there. And if you stop at that second why, you're missing out on what's deeper and what's really drives your values and your goals going forward. So maybe that as you work your way down and say, okay, well, why do I provide for my family? Maybe to achieve financial flexibility. Okay, well, why is financial flexibility important to you? Well, maybe it's around affording to buy time, to buy things, to buy experiences for your family. And as you work your way down, you get to that ultimate why. Why do I work? What's the purpose of my wealth? So you just kind of are able to skip down to that fifth statement, and it really gives you an idea of what is the purpose of your wealth, and what are you trying to accomplish over time. And what we find is that this can change over time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you may have goals early on or throughout your life where you're saying, hey, I'm just going to really, work hard, and these are my goals: save for education for my kids, and get to retirement. And then eventually you get to those things, and education's paid for, and then so things can change over time. And I recall a client situation where they were really focused on philanthropy, and really saying, the purpose of my wealth is really to give to these causes that I feel very passionate about. And what happened in their family was there was a family crisis that came up, and their priorities shift. And so their whys shifted. And that's good, and that's okay. So this is something that you want to revisit over time. And yeah, be prepared to have that whiteout with you, or that backspace button, because as you work your way down, and as you work through the whole exercise, especially as we look at values and things like that, you might find yourself going back and being like, well, actually, the real why is X, Y, or Z. So that, that's really kind of the exercise here. So again, when you're on your own time, it's a really great thing to do this for yourself. And it's also great to do this, to have your spouse or even your business partner do this, or even other family members, because what we find is that some of these things are really in our head, right? We know what our values are, we know what our why is, but we don't necessarily communicate that with others. And what's amazing about the process is that people want to help each other achieve their goals. And so it's our job to, communicate our goals with other people.
So Jason, as you think about the 5 whys, outside of maybe something changing in the family, what's another time that you see folks where it's time to turn this back on, it's time to revisit it?
Yeah, I mean, I think of, possibly times of crisis. So if you have a close friend pass away, that kind of, your mortality comes into view, right? And you start to think about what's really important. What are we really here for? Do I need to be spending 80 hours a week working and grinding away? Or, are these relationships with my spouse, with my family, with my faith, are those really more important and should be and should get more of our time over time?
That's great. Thank you. Well, and I think you bring up a really great point too, that this leads us into the idea of the values. And that's the second exercise that we include in our strategic wealth map. And when I think about values, this is something that we do all the time in our businesses, right, Jason? Whenever we're working with business owners or executives, it's like, oh yeah, the values of my company are, Bartlett's top value is teamwork makes the dream work. And we know that, and that rolls off the tip of our tongue. But when I think, what's the number one value for the Mazzocca family or for myself, that's one where we tend not to spend as much time exploring it as we look ahead. So this is really a really valuable exercise to do for yourself. And also one where I think sometimes it's hard to say, what are my values? We've included a list here, and it's in the PDF document of, lots of ideas just to get your brain going. And I think most of us could go down this list and probably pick out 10 to 15 things that are really important to us. So how do we narrow it down? One exercise that I've used is think about what makes you really unique. If I said to, Jason, hey, Jason, what are the things that make you unique, that make you really special? If you start from that, it seems like it's a little bit easier to start there and then clarify your values. For me, authenticity is something that I think makes me unique. And it's also something that is really important to me. So that's in my values list. Fair warning, if you put it in your values and you share it with someone else, they will hold you accountable. So one of my values and one of my top values is family. Well, whenever I get into a little spurt of maybe working a little too late, having too many evening dinners, evening events, too much work travel, my husband pulls out our looking ahead strategic wealth map and literally points to it and says, hey, you said that family was your number one value. Your calendar is not reflecting your values. Let's take a look at this and revisit this. I also think that this is one that can change over time a little bit, but these are really core to who you are. This is no different than as we think about corporate values. We're not shifting our corporate values all the time. This is in your DNA. This is your character. But sometimes, as Jason said with the whys, it's like we know it internally, but we don't always express that externally. And having it written down is one way that you can start to facilitate those conversations with other important people in your life. We also see this be really critical when families are having conversations and they want to start sharing topics around their wealth with their children and saying, as we think about generational wealth, how do we make this transition happen successfully over time? Jason, there's a lot of examples we can probably share when it comes to the values. One that comes to mind for me is an experience I had where I was working with a family and family was their number one value. And we were looking for ways to really lean into that. And they had a vacation home. And we thought that that was the perfect way to really engage that family value. But what we realized by working through the financial plan and then analyzing how the financial plan was bringing those values to life is that the family wasn't actually using the vacation home. And they needed to kind of shift the way that they built their financial plan and built their family time together to really re-engage with that value set. So the combination of being able to look at the values and then apply it to the financial plan is really where the magic starts to happen in these exercises. So Jason, thinking about the values, how does that lead us into the next exercise on the pillars of wealth and looking across those 5 pillars of wealth?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you know, as you've seen, if when you start going through this process, that's what we said, you be prepared to go back and subtract and delete some things and really update things, because those values usually speak to what these 5 pillars of wealth are. So what you're seeing here is nothing that we created. They sometimes are called the 5 capitals. They're out there in the world, but we really find it important to take a look at each of these 5 categories. And the concept here is you kind of rate yourself. Where am I at in each of these categories? So in my, you know, physical, which would be kind of the health bucket. Intellectual, am I getting that intellectual stimulation that I need to be fulfilled? Spiritual, relational, what are those relationships look like with my family and friends? And then the financial bucket is the one that we talk about a lot, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that, but really looking at this. And, you know, I don't know if there's anybody who ever scores 100% across the top. And if they do, and they've figured out that secret, please share it with everybody you know. I'm sure there are 100 books that talk about how to do that. But, you know, I haven't figured it out yet, but over time, these things tend to ebb and flow, right? So sometimes you're focusing on your, you know, your physical well-being, and you've got a great exercise routine. You're doing strength training 3 days a week. You're doing your cardio, and you're eating well, and that's all growing well, but maybe you're falling short in another area. And so doing this type of exercise really can help you lead to different actions. Typically, as we see with our business owner clients, it's actually that physical piece that's usually rated pretty low because they're really working hard and they're spending a lot of time in the office. But it's really looking at each of these things and according to your values, which one of these should be really high for you? If you look at your values and then you look at this chart and there's a little bit of misalignment, that's okay. That's why we're doing this. And that's why we're going through this process. And again, it's really about sharing this and comparing, so maybe your 5 pillars of wealth look different than your spouse's 5 pillars of wealth. And that's okay too. Talk about those things, because remember, when we talk to each other about them, we can root for each other. We can facilitate the success in each of these buckets.
And I love the idea, Jason, of an accountability buddy. I know that you and your spouse have used this as a way of holding each other accountable to fill up that the physical well-being, and started some new exercise plans. I've had friends where we've used this as an accountability way on the intellectual side to really engage with our book club and push ourselves to read new things and try new things and discuss new topics and make sure that we're still giving ourselves that intellectual stimulation that we're all seeking. I had the fortune of working with a family where they were a young couple. They were working really, really hard. They had recently moved across the country for a new job opportunity, and the financial bucket was quite strong. They had been working with them for over 5 years. They had done all the savings. They were extremely diligent. They were maxing out all their retirement plans. But when they went through this exercise, one of their primary values was adventure. And when they went through those pillars of wealth, their relational was lower than where they really wanted it to be. And when they went through that exercise and talked about it, they said, we've been in this phase of life where we've been running hard, we've been working hard, we've been doing all the right things financially, but we're not really using it in a way that's providing purpose and enjoyment. We're not really being fulfilled by what we're working on. It's just kind of stacking chips. What do we do about that? By working through this exercise, they really answered the questions themselves. They said, listen, we need to do a better job of connecting relationally. We say we value adventure, but we haven't scheduled a vacation. I don't know when our next vacation is. I don't know when our next adventure is, and we need to do that. And when they went through and looked at that, then they came back to their Bartlett team and said, hey, when we book that next vacation, how much buffer do we have so we don't have to feel guilty about going on a vacation? And we were able to run their financial plan and give them a number and say, hey, you have a buffer of about $20,000 to $25,000 in your financial plan that you can use towards accomplishing that adventure. And so that's another great example of it's the action of working through that together, recognizing where maybe one of those buckets isn't quite as full, and we can take some of the power of the finances and use it to bring those values to life. And the best part is they didn't even feel guilty at all when they booked that next vacation. And we knew exactly why when they called us and said, hey, we need $10,000 for that next exciting trip. We were all thrilled that they were able to accomplish that.
Yeah, and I think, one thing that we found in this process too is that, and we talk about the money piece a little bit, allocating the funds appropriately to achieve these goals, to fill these buckets up. But at some point, what we find with a lot of our clients is that the constraint isn't necessarily money. The constraint is time.
Mm-hmm.
And so their time is finite. We have 24 hours in the day, no matter who you are, no matter what your financial wealth is, your health, all of those things, 24 hours in a day. And so how do you allocate those hours, those minutes throughout the day is another way to think about this as well. Take a look at the calendar. What does the calendar look like in terms of these 5 pillars of wealth? How are you spending your time? Is it how you want to spend your time? And if not, are there changes? Are there actions that you can take? And so, the money part's really important. That's what helps us facilitate some of these goals, but also the time is another piece to be cognizant of.
So we've walked through the first key exercises, 3 really critical exercises as we explore what is the purpose of my wealth? What are those core questions I need to ask? Why am I working so hard? What is the purpose? What are my values? And what are those different pillars of wealth that I need to focus on a little bit more as I go forward? At the bottom, you'll see that there's an area to say, what actions do I need to take next? And that's a great way to engage with those people important in your life who can help be that accountability buddy, and also to just communicate those areas that you want to look to. Flipping more onto that financial wellness side. So as we think about that financial pillar, that's certainly our specialty here at Bartlett. and wanted to provide some ideas and thoughts around really current items going on right now here in 2023. So I'll kick us off and say the hottest topic that everyone is coming to me on right now is cash, and this idea of cash management and cash flow considerations. And when I look at the lineup, this touches so many different things. It touches our living expenses. It impacts our, how we're paying our taxes. It really, cash flow goes into our plan for our retirement savings, what we're doing about education funding, our assumptions and plans for real estate. So cash is king, cash is comfort. We certainly recognize that. It really goes into many different aspects of what we do. When we look at the hexagons there of those different aspects of financial wellness, the first one I'll touch on is the idea of lifestyle expenses. And as a business owner, we say all the time, you can't track what you can't improve what you can't track. You can't make changes to something if you don't know where you're starting and where you're going forward. And I think we think about that in the business sense. We wouldn't run a business without a balance sheet and an income statement and a statement of cash flows. But it seems that oftentimes we run our personal lives without those items. And so the idea of looking at those lifestyle expenses and really using those lifestyle expenses as a guide for saying, what do I want to do going forward? Going back to that conversation on, do some of these things need to shift over time? One of the tools that I recommend is all of our Bartlett clients have access to e-money, and e-money allows you to link in your banks, your credit cards, really, add everything in there so that you can track where those annual expenses are coming in over time and start to categorize them. And when you look at those categories, that's where you can go back and say, oh man, I spent a lot on stuff and I didn't spend as much on experiences, and that's not what I wanted. Or holy cow, I thought that I was donating a lot more towards this organization that I'm super passionate about, but it turns out I was donating more just to things that happened to kind of come into my inbox or things that people asked me to be a part of. So if you are a Bartlett client, you'll have access to e-money. You can reach out to your advisor if you can't remember your login or want to set that back up again, and use that spending tab as a way of tracking it. Now, anyone who knows me knows I'm not a fan of diets. I'm not a fan of budgets, but I am a fan of looking at this on a regular basis. So for my family, we track it quarterly. We look at it quarterly and just say, where are we in terms of where we thought we'd be, where our goals are, and are we spending our money in a way that's really smart for us? Jason, anything else to add there for the idea of looking at those expenses and really analyzing opportunity sets?
Yeah, I think, it's just a good way to have a level set too. And once you have that data, you can kind of look at, again, going higher level. Does it align with those values that you have? And tracking it is a good thing over time. It also, as you mentioned before, it does speak directly to the financial plan. And if you've had your financial plan done, one thing that your advisor likely says is that the most important number in this plan is that annual expense number, right? Because we grow that at inflation, it's over time. But if that starting value isn't accurate, it's really tough to rely upon the financial plan as a decision-making tool, which is what it's intended to be.
The other beauty of looking at the idea of that cash flow optimization and understanding that is it allows you to save appropriately and make your cash work for you. And that's a very different story today than it was 2 years ago. But at this point, you can really optimize the value of that cash that you're holding on your balance sheet. So for a lot of our business owner clients, they are paying quarterly taxes. For a lot of our retired clients, they're doing the same thing. So if you're not paying taxes through your normal, if you're not a W-2 employee, it didn't really used to matter when you paid the government necessarily. And now it does. And you can earn something on that cash, whether that's emergency fund cash, whether that's cash set aside for a future kind of medium term expense or opportunity. So right now, cash earns around 5%, and there's different ways of accessing it. you can have FDIC insurance through a cash product that provides 4.9% yield up to at least $500,000 for an individual, which is higher than the normal FDIC balances, up to $1 million for a joint account. Again, higher than the normal FDIC balances. So if you're interested in that, reach out to your advisor. Money market funds. So the money market funds at the custodian in your custodial account can earn over 5% right now. And even treasuries. So buying a 6-month US treasury and going out there and actually buying that in your account can earn about 5.4% for 6 months out to 1 year, kind of in that range, depending on the day. And starting to see some really interesting CD rates out there as well. So depending on how long you want to lock that money up, I think it's important just to know that make your cash work for you. That's absolutely something we don't want to let go of right now.
Yeah, and I think, the increased interest rates has an effect on the other side of the balance sheet, right? So that's the cash piece, but what about the liability piece and the debt, what we call debt optimization as one of the hexagons. 2 years ago, we were saying things like, well, a home equity line of credit is not a bad way to get some cheap cash to accomplish a goal, or maybe a pledged asset line for a short-term buffer. Both of those are now in the 7 to 8% range for the rates. And so you have to really start to think about, the cash that you earn at the bank versus the debt that you have outstanding. Not to mention mortgage rates right now. So a lot of people are, whether they want to move or not, they're kind of staying in their house because they don't want to reset that mortgage rate. They've got that low 2.75% mortgage that they're so proud of, and absolutely they should be. That same mortgage is now 7% over a 30-year period. So, optimizing that and looking at that, right? It's dramatically changed over the last 2 years. So maybe you do have a home equity line of credit that you've had out there and you've drawn upon, and you're having, you're seeing these interest payments come out of your bank account. Maybe it's time to pay that down or even pay that off. So something to think about over time. This thing, the environment changes. What interest rates will do from here, if you know that, let me know as well. We don't make it a habit to try to predict interest rates, but again, having a plan around your debt and either paying it off, paying it down is really important, and having kind of that long-term low fixed rates, keeping that mortgage in place is usually the right move too.
So as we think about those long-term decisions, another one that comes up a lot that now's a great time to be looking at is the idea of estate planning. And this is something that unfortunately I've helped a number of clients through recently with some unexpected passings. And it's always a great reminder that there is never a bad time to look at your documents, to really go back and reanalyze your will, reanalyze your trust, reanalyze those medical directives, and make sure that people have those in place. And our number 2 item there is, in case of emergency, do you all know, who to call? Where is the sensitive information saved? Where are passwords saved? Is there life insurance in place to help facilitate either a business transition or income replacement for the family going forward? And really analyzing that estate planning checklist. So sometimes, unfortunately, what we see is that someone updates the documents, but the left hand doesn't talk to the right, and it's not really designated correctly in those beneficiary assignments. So we want to make sure that those are designated correctly, and that estate plan is brought to life as we look forward.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add there is just that title's really true. Everybody needs estate planning. And maybe it's like nobody wants to do estate planning. Maybe that's another statement. Nobody really likes to think about it, their own mortality, but it's really important. And it really starts for most of our clients. It starts even maybe when they get married or when they have that first child, and the idea there is guardianship comes up. And if we were both to pass simultaneously, who would care for the child long term? That's usually what prompts the action. But hopefully, we're prompting you today to kind of think about how can we update these things more regularly and make sure that they're aligned with the goals. There are some planning ideas around all of these items that you can work with your advisor.
Jason, I know that we touch on a part of that plan is oftentimes life insurance, and that's something that comes up in our realm, and talking about having term insurance in place, business insurance in place to facilitate business transitions. But something that doesn't come up as much, I don't feel like we touch on it quite as much, is that idea of property and casualty insurance. Can you talk about what's going on in that property casualty market right now and some of the risk management things our clients should be aware of?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is just the value of your home has likely increased, and maybe dramatically, over the last 5 years. We know that that's the case here where we are in Cincinnati, a very hot housing market. So the reason why I mentioned that is to look at your property and casualty insurance on your home, and do you have enough coverage? And the answer is, do you have what's called replacement cost coverage, or is it market based? And you really want to have coverage for which you can rebuild your home at the current market prices. And we've gone through a couple periods here in the recent past where lumber prices were really high, and those have definitely come back down. But you have to think about that when you're looking at your property and casualty insurance, making sure you have enough, and making sure that your coverage, and that you're covering all of those things, especially those other things inside the house, jewelry, collectibles, and looking at that kind of with a fine-tooth comb. And then the other thing I'll mention, which kind of coincides with that, is the concept of umbrella liability coverage. And this is the one that people usually don't think of right away, and you usually place it through the person or through the agency that you use for your property and casualty. But this is general liability coverage. If somebody has an accident on your property and they sue you, you want to make sure you have enough coverage in that. And it's very inexpensive coverage, but it's one of those really kind of high benefit, low cost type things that we don't always talk about or think about.
One of the items I know I've seen recently is clients are coming back and telling us their insurance rates have gone up. And I know that I've seen it in our own household too. My husband owns a mixed use building as a part of his career, and they came back and wanted to double our insurance rate on that. So it's a very, what they would call a hard market in the insurance industry right now. It is an insurer's market. We've had some pretty big losses in that industry, unfortunately, and insurers are trying to make that back up through higher prices. So know that unfortunately, because of some of the hurricanes and wildfires and things like that, like the real estate coverage portion of insurance is continuing to go up price wise. It's a really great opportunity to make sure, if you kind of just had your insurance and set it and forget it, that now can be a really great opportunity to analyze, what is my current risk structure out there? What risks am I really protecting against? Are there any pieces that are missing? Because you may be able to build an insurance coverage plan that's a better fit for where you are right now. And there's a lot of really great P&C brokers out there who can help you find and build a package that works for your particular risks, whether that's on the umbrella side, on a real estate side, and also factoring in any business aspects of that as well.
Yeah, and specifically, speaking to our clients in Florida and California, I'm sure if you're there, you have seen that this situation is really tough. There are less and less insurance companies who want to insure homes and property in those areas. So supply's down, which drives up prices. So we have some clients and I've heard of stories of people getting dropped, their coverage being dropped. So it's not like it's a zero. There is insurance available, but it's something you have to be intentional about, and really being proactive and reaching out and talking to your broker and see what you need to ensure the full value of your property.
So Jason, the last item we're going to touch on here is jumping into tax planning. I saved the best for last because Jason loves talking about taxes. So I know he'll get super jazzed about this and all of the changes underway. Final call, also keep submitting those questions. We have some coming in the Q&A, and we will jump to those just as soon as Jason walks us through some of the items that we need to be aware of from a tax planning and tax strategy.
Great. Yep, taxes. So here we go. We've got, a couple things just on the top of my mind as I'm working with clients on their tax plans. One thing that Holly had mentioned earlier about cash that you have that is earmarked for taxes, right? And the idea of if you have a large payment that you think is due in April, make sure you're talking to your advisor about making that money work. Maybe you can put it in a T-bill that earns, a significant amount of interest in between those times. Remember, 2 years ago, that timing didn't necessarily matter because we weren't earning much on our cash, but that's something to be mindful of. The big thing that passed in the last couple of years is the Secure Act, and then the most recent was called Secure 2.0. And so if you're on this, why does that matter? There was actually 90 different provisions of Secure 2.0. No, I'm not going to go through all of them, thankfully for all of you. But I do want to point out a couple of them. If anybody on here who was born in 1951 or after, your required minimum distribution age from your IRA or from your qualified retirement accounts changed. And so if we take a little history lesson, the year used to be 70 and a half. Why did they pick 70 and a half? Who knows? But it used to be, everybody knew that you had to take your first distribution from your retirement accounts at 70 and a half. And then they've changed it. They changed it to 72. They have now changed it to 73 for those that were born after 1951 or after and before 1960. And if you're born after 1960, the RMD age, or the required minimum distribution age, is actually 75. So why does this matter? Well, it allows you to have the money in a tax-deferred environment for longer, which is a nice benefit. It allows that money to grow tax-free for a couple more years in some cases. It also creates kind of these gap years where between maybe when you retired from your job or from your business and when you start to take your IRA distribution. So maybe there's some opportunity to do some Roth conversions or to pull forward some distributions to fill up lower tax brackets. So these are all things in order to save on taxes, and something that you really need to look at a multi-year tax projection to make sure that you're paying less taxes overall as opposed to really honing in on 1 year. So that was a big change that happened, and we, there are many different changes. Some of them were effective this year, some will be effective next year in 2024. So as those roll out, we'll be talking about those as well. And the other thing that comes to mind in tax planning is this idea that the rules change in 2026. So right now we have income tax brackets. They are what they are. The highest marginal rate is 37%. The estate planning exemption is $12.92 million a piece. And so that's where we are currently. Now, if nothing changes in Congress, meaning that they don't pass any new laws, that will reset to some extent. So the income tax brackets, the 39.6% bracket will come back. So some people's income tax rates will go up. The brackets will also widen. So we might have a situation where you're actually going to be paying lower taxes now and higher taxes in 2026. The only thing that's out there that counteracts that is the state and local tax deduction that that was limited to $10,000 a year and still is to today. That actually comes back into play in 2026. So there is a possibility that your taxable income could go down in 2026. All of this to be said that there's a ton of complexity and there's things to be thinking about. What can I do over the next couple years in order to plan for these. So if you have a taxable estate and you were thinking about making a large gift before 2026, our encouragement is to talk to your estate planning attorney now. And the reason why is we can model things out. You want to look at things, what do they look like today? What do they look like after a gift? And what's the proper structure? Should it be in a trust? All of those things, and get that in place. But also just the practicality of our estate planning attorney friends are going to be very, very busy in 2025 trying to do all of these things to plan for all of their clients who want to make these gifts before that time. So if you have the intent to make the gift, that's where everything starts. It starts with intent. You don't do things for tax purposes. You do things because you have the intent. Reach out and start running some numbers. And then the last thing I'll touch on in terms of tax planning is just year-end tax planning. I did just say year-end. It seems like we're far away from that, but we're really not. Charitable giving is usually a topic that comes up at year-end, but there's nothing that says that you can't do your charitable giving now. So if that's something that you do every year and you usually do it in December, think about pulling that forward. Think about making stock gifts versus cash gifts. That's an old one, but it never goes out of style. It's a very effective tax planning technique. And also think about bunching your charitable contributions using a donor advised fund. This is one that we've been talking about for a couple years, and it still works really, really well. It's just an ability and a way to make sure that you're getting the full tax deduction for your charitable contributions over time. And all of our financial planning focused advisors really know these rules intricately and would love to talk through and modeling out each of these items.
That's great. Thanks, Jason, for walking through all of those updates. You are one of the only people I know who makes talking about taxes fun. So thanks for bringing the fun back to the conversation. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. I'll leave us with 3 really key action items before we jump into the Q&A. First is to write down your goals. You are 40% more likely to achieve a goal if you write it down. And this is something that we've talked about for a long time. Again, this is not new science that's out there, but it is proven that just by writing it down, by taking out that strategic wealth map, writing it down, and then using those last couple of pages at the back to write down those goals, you're actually more likely to accomplish them. The next great way is to communicate it with somebody else. Share this with the people who are most important in your life. Share it with your business partners. Share it with your colleagues. Share it with your spouse or your best friend or your children. Whoever those important people are, share it with them. And then finally, revisit the plan. This is not a one and done. Nothing in the financial planning and investment world is ever one and done. This is a living, breathing document. For all the reasons that we walked through, whether things are changing in your own personal life, in your business situation, or externally in the world, it's important to pull this out, dust it off, revisit it, and continue to engage with that strategic wealth map. So let's jump into a couple of questions. 2 great questions here. Jason, one came in around, ideally, how much time would you like to have with a business owner to advise and strategize on business succession? Similar to estate planning, sometimes this is a can that gets kicked down the road to the detriment of the business owner's financial independence and retirement and what they want to bequeath to their heirs and beneficiaries. So in your experience, Jason, how much time would you like to have when you're working with a business owner?
Yeah, so the quick answer is as much time as we can get. Good business exit planning is just good business planning. So even when you start a business, you should really think about the end, having the end in mind. And I know that that's kind of a crazy concept at a startup kind of situation, but think about that long term. What is the actual life cycle of this business? Practically speaking, if we're going to say, hey, that's off the table, the 10-year scenario, certainly 3 years away from sale, 3 to 5 years away from sale, you can really start to devise a plan for, do you want to do some charitable giving as part of the transition of the business. There's some really unique opportunities in the charitable giving world that can reduce your taxes. Do you want to involve family in this situation? Do you want to maybe gift a piece of the business to a family member, and maybe you can get a discount on that and then sell it for a higher value, and then all of that value is out of your estate? So there are several different things and nuances, but they all require you to plan very meticulously, and they are all have to be executed before a letter of intent is signed. So what we sometimes find is that we get involved a little bit late in the game, or maybe too late in the game, where a client says, well, I've got a letter of intent to sign my business. What can we do? And it's like, well, we can do, it's not a zero, but there's a lot more that we can do if we have a plan together and we start to involve that advisory team early on. So we get the CPA involved, we get the attorney involved, we possibly get a business consultant involved, or an investment banker or business broker, really thinking about what is the ultimate plan here. And the sooner you start, the better. So practically, I guess, if you were to nail down a day, I'd say 3 years would be kind of the ideal, or maybe even a minimum of the time.
So Jason, just to piggyback on that, I know one of the things that I think sometimes holds people back is they say, well, all the value of my wealth is really wrapped up in my business. Or for our clients who are executives, they'll say, well, it's all wrapped up in my 401k. Like, you can't really manage my money yet. And my response to that is always, we can do a plan for you without ever managing assets. So we can really be valuable in that planning stage and just run a plan for a fee that can guide a lot of those future decisions. And we'd love to have the opportunity to manage the investments down the road. But I do think that sometimes that holds people back, is the idea like, well, I don't need a wealth advisor. All my wealth is in the business. Have you seen that before?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's why we put up those 5 steps for business owners. It's really, honestly, steps 1 through 4 don't involve managing assets, right? Steps 1 through 4 are really financial planning driven. And the fact that there's a lot of value that we can add ahead of a business transition that doesn't necessarily require that we manage assets for a fee. So again, I think we've seen it a lot. And most recently, the biggest benefit I've seen is that we run a financial plan with the different sales scenarios, right? What is the upside scenario? What's our base case? And what are a couple downside scenarios of, what if you can't get full value? And how does that look like in your financial plan? Being armed with that it gives you confidence in that process. It removes some of the inertia from when you're actually going through that sales process to know kind of what your number is and what's that minimum number that, the plan works. I'm able to provide for my lifestyle, for myself and my family for the rest of my life. This is likely the biggest event of a business owner's life, is the sale transaction. So you need to do the work and really get granular on what do those cash flows look like? What does the taxes look like? Are there opportunities to save? And that really starts ahead of it. And none of it requires that, we, choose investments on your behalf.
So Jason, another question here, you had touched on family. We have a question here around the power of family meetings. So do you typically see value in meeting with a family who has a business, who has an operating business? Generally, are family meetings a helpful idea?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what we're going to always talk about is more communication is always better, because the lack of communication usually means that people tend to make their own truth out of that, right? So being very upfront and open about what the plans are. But let me be very crystal clear on this too. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are sharing numbers with all of the family. And I think that's a big misconception, is that when you have a family meeting, you have to completely open up everything to everybody and show them all the assets or the value of the business or the balance sheet or anything. You don't have to do any of that. But we do find tremendous value in just talking to the next generation about the business. Like, wouldn't you want to know, does the next generation want to work in the business? Do they have a passion for that business? What we see is that sometimes the matriarch or patriarch of the family has this idea that we're just going to pass it down to the next generation, and they're going to grow the business like we did. And the next generation is like, I don't know if I want to fill in the blank of whatever the business is for the rest of my life, because I saw my mom and dad working really hard and doing all that stuff. I would rather do something else. I'd rather, have another passion around my career. And, or, the other side of it is does the next generation have the skill set to run the business? And, really talking through that as a family is really powerful. And then the final thing on family meetings that we see is talking about philanthropy together. And we see a lot of power in that and a lot of togetherness, right? When we work with families, usually our number one goal that we set out at the outset is family harmony. And there's very few people who disagree with that. They usually want family harmony. That's an ultimate goal. And communication really helps with family harmony. And so looking at something like philanthropy and saying, why don't we all choose a couple different causes and talk to each other about where we want to give family money to, it can really be a really fruitful conversation, and also teach this idea of stewardship and giving back and community to generations, not just the G2, the second generation, but also the third generation.
That's great. Well, I think that's all that we have right now coming in for the questions. So I'll just leave you all with a big thank you for joining us here today and for walking through the strategic wealth map. This is the first step in that 5-step strategy for our clients who are business owners and are working through those transitions. But it's really valuable for all of our clients to continue to lean into the purpose of their wealth. Ultimate fulfillment is purpose plus enjoyment. It's this magical combination that you can create really powerful outcomes when you work in advance, get ahead of it, communicate well, and revisit that plan over time. So I encourage you to reach out to your Bartlett team. If you are a new member of the Bartlett family or looking to join the Bartlett family, I encourage you to reach out to Jason or me, and we'll make sure that you are in great hands. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we'll see you soon.